Mafia. On today's Air Raid Hour pregame, we'll be breaking down what we expect to see from the Bills tonight, plus previewing key matchups and handing out our pregame superlatives. But first,
Welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour Cover One pregame show. My name is Steve Mathis, joined as always by Dave Tilton, as we get you ready for 7 hours of commercial-free football and then the Buffalo Bills versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Dave, I want to get things started off with a quick conversation before we get to the weather, before we get to the injuries. I hate myself for forgetting to pull this up sooner, and so I don't have the direct statistics in front of me, but a couple of people were running the odds. The chances for the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals, the winner of this game to make the playoffs and the loser of this game to make the playoffs. And the winner of this game, their odds to make the playoffs are very good. To summarize the statistic that I saw that I can't remember the exact numbers of, and the chances of the loser making the playoffs is very, very bad. So I don't know, like without putting too much thought into it, which is typically what I do, this might be maybe one of the bigger, if not the biggest, Sean McDermott regular season games.
It's a big game, and I think that, obviously we'll see what happens kind of at the outcome of this Chiefs-Dolphins game. If the Dolphins end up losing this game against the Chiefs, I think a loss for the Bills in the game against the Bengals is status quo. It probably maybe doesn't hurt them as much. It obviously will hurt them a lot in the chances to get the 1 seed, which is still very much in the conversation at this point. But look, if the Dolphins somehow come back and win this game and the Bills do lose to the Bengals, I do see that the road to winning the AFC East being obviously a lot more challenging, not impossible. With that said, if the Bills do lose this game, they'll drop to 5-4 and they'll still be over 500, and they'll still have a pretty good chance, I think, to make the playoffs. There's a bunch of teams that are 4-3. Obviously, with the Steelers just won on Thursday, pushed them up to 5-3 as well. But a lot of teams that are 4-3, the Bills were the only team that was 5-3, obviously before the Steelers won. So there's still a lot that has to be played out in these last 8 to 9 games, 8 games of the season. And I think probably those statistics, a lot of that are probably rooted in the Bills' schedule, I would imagine, an upcoming schedule being very difficult. And that, whereas I'm not sure what the Bengals schedule looks like here on out, but obviously the Bills and the Dolphins and the AFC East teams do have tough schedules kind of coming up. So I can understand that. I think like those statistics are cool to look at, but I also feel like it's maybe a little bit too early to worry too much if the Bills were to lose this game as far as playoff hopes are concerned.
Yeah, let's get into some of the pre-game talk here. Let's start with the weather and the injuries. Obviously, we don't have an inactive list to go over because the game isn't going to be played until 8:20 tonight. But the weather report, 50 degrees, no precipitation, 3-mile-per-hour winds, all projected. So that's pretty good for a Cincinnati night in November. Weather should not be an issue for either team. Looking at the Buffalo Bills, they have 2 players out with injury. Balin Spector with a hamstring, AJ Klein with a back injury. Obviously, they have a plethora of players on injured reserve. Looking at the projected inactives for the Buffalo Bills, you're probably going to see Jermaine Ifedi inactive again. You're probably going to see Alec Anderson inactive again. There's already the reports coming out that DeMar Hamlin is going to be inactive again. So that really leaves the last inactive spot as the question mark. Who is going to be inactive? Is it going to be Linval Joseph? Is it going to be Rasul Douglas? And I think the other 2 possibilities, if you really whittle it down and look at the roster, it would be Poona Ford and it would be Kingsley Jonathan. So any thoughts on who that final inactive is going to be? Are we going to see both Linval Joseph and Rasul Douglas today?
Well, I would say if you're the Bills coming into this game, you'd love to have both of those guys play, right? I think
Mhm.
like
Yep.
you bring these guys in because you recognize a deficiency. Now getting them up to speed and getting them into a situation where they can come in and contribute right away, that's a different story. I think it's probably an easier task for a guy like Linval Joseph to come in and play, 20, 25 snaps in this game in the middle of that defensive line. And I also think that would be, a factor, right, in the Bills potentially trying to slow
Mhm.
down Joe Mixon, who's been gaining a bit of steam over the last couple weeks. And we saw how badly the Bills really needed to defend the run against Mixon the last time they played in the playoff game. Now, with that said, you probably also would love to have Rasul Douglas in this game because Jamar Chase has 60 catches already this year, and you're going to
Yep.
get
Mhm.
a pretty bad matchup, I think, if you're the Bills with T. Higgins. Although he hasn't been great so far this year, it's still a plus matchup
Mhm.
for the Bengals, and then you still got to worry about Tyler Boyd. So if it was what I would love to see, I would love to see Joseph and Douglas both active. Um, and I probably would if I felt comfortable enough that those guys were going to be active, I
Mhm.
probably would deactivate Kingsley Jonathan for this game, but I don't know if the Bills feel the same.
Yeah, I think that it's gonna be either Kingsley Jonathan or it's gonna be Poona Ford. I legitimately think that we're gonna see both Linval Joseph in this game for his run stuffing ability. I mean, Rashad White averaged 4.3 yards per carry last week when when he was barely averaging like 3 yards per carry most of his regular season games. I think
Right.
run stuffing is an issue. So you might see a situation where Linval Joseph plays and Poona Ford sits down, or if the Buffalo Bills aren't exactly feeling safe and comfortable with Linval Joseph playing a lot of snaps and they're worried about the depth there, they might inactivate Kingsley Jonathan because they have 4 other edge rushers that they can go to. So I think it's going to be Ford, or Jonathan. I think Linval Joseph plays, and I think you want Rasul Douglas at back there because you don't want to carry 9 DBs like the Buffalo Bills did last week against the Cincinnati Bengals. I think they're going to have that 10th DB. And since we already know it's not going to be DeMar Hamlin, there's really only other one option, and that is Rasul Douglas to go along with Josh Norman, maybe as a guy who would come off the bench for the Buffalo Bills. Looking at the Bengals and actives, Josh Topu is out. Joe Mixon is questionable with a chest injury. Akeem Davis-Gaither is questionable, and Max Sharping is questionable. If Joe Mixon can't go, the only 2 running backs on the roster are Travion Williams and Chris Evans. They did not make a move to elevate a running back with Chris Brown on IR. They only called up Stanley Morgan, which was a special teams thing because Tyson Anderson tore his ACL last week. I think all signs point to Joe Mixon playing in this football game, but maybe he's on a limited snap count.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen in the past where the Bengals have, in prior years, even where the Bengals have kind of had a little bit of that committee with guys like Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine when he was
Mhm.
there. They have tended to lean more on Mixon as a bell cow type this year without Perine there, and really Mixon has been that guy that has gotten a bulk of the snaps in the backfield for that Bengals team. So my my instinct would tell me that if Mixon is going to play in this game, he's still going to
Mhm.
be a bell cowish type of back for tonight. And I don't think the Bengals would put him out there with a chest injury if they didn't feel like he was going to be able to
Mhm.
handle the lion's share of the snaps. Now, with Mixon potentially
Mhm.
playing, even being a bit banged up, maybe the game plan's a little bit different though for the Bengals. Maybe they
Yep.
come out and they only give a guy like Mixon 15 to 20 carries and lean a little bit more on the passing game. We'll see. But
Yep.
I'm not reading too much into the Mixon injury right now. I think if he's out there, he's going to
Mhm.
be a big contributor.
Yeah, not to get too into the weeds, but the Cincinnati Bengals, the 2 things that I was really surprised by them this offseason was number 1, their reliance on Irv Smith Jr. at the tight end position, not really replacing Hayden Hurst, who left in free agency. And I know they drafted Chris Brown, and maybe they really had a lot of faith in Chris Brown, who's now on injured reserve, but they could go off onto the streets and find a veteran running back to come in and take some of the load off of Joe Mixon. And they just really haven't chosen to do that yet, which is a
Mhm.
little shocking to me as well. But I think they might just be wanting to run the tires off of Joe Mixon this year and then let him loose in the offseason. But
Could be, yeah.
that's a conversation for Cincinnati Bengals podcast, not for Buffalo Bills podcast. So we're going to get into the Buffalo Bills offense versus the Cincinnati Bengals defense. But before we do, a quick word from the Cover One Buffalo guys on the best way to support us here at Cover One.
Many people ask us the best way to support us here at Cover One, and that is to sign up to become a Cover One Pass member. That contribution helps give us the access to all the data and information we use to create the content that you love.
And I think most importantly, brings you into our community of insiders. It's a great community based on Slack. I know a lot of people don't want to be on social media anymore or be in on those conversations. We bring all of it to you right in our great community of educated fans. And most importantly, you get access to our content creators.
Even better than that, everybody loves merch. You get awesome t-shirts, a cool decal, and a letter from the Cover One team signed directly to you.
All for $60. That gets you the entire season, next year's free agency and draft. $60. Click the link in the description. Cover One Insider. Become one today.
And if you want to support this podcast, the Air 8 Hour pregame show, smash that like button. Hit the share button, send this as a text message or an email to family, friends, anyone you think would enjoy joining us here on the Air 8 Hour Cover One pregame show. Let's get into it, Dave. Bills offense versus the Bengals defense. And I was just having this conversation with a couple of other people via text message. I just have so much respect for Luan Arumo and the job that he does with that Cincinnati Bengals defense. I think that guys like him, guys like Steve Spagnuolo, guys like Wink Martindale, they're all up there as some of the upper echelon defensive coordinators in the National Football League. Obviously, Wink is having his struggles this year. Everyone has their struggles. I think you could probably put Sean McDermott up there as well. What we've seen from him when the defense is healthy has been pretty inspiring, but they're obviously struggling right now. But the Buffalo Bills offensively, 3 weeks of slow starts, but hot finishes. Then last week, it was a hot start and a super slow finish for the offense. We're going to need a consistent 4-quarter performance out of this offense to not only, one up Luan Arumo, but one up the Cincinnati Bengals offense, which is firing on all cylinders right now.
Yeah, and I think that if we talk about the Bills offense in this game, you think about the slow starts they've had in recent weeks. Mm-hmm. You really can't afford to have that happen against the Bengals. Like, this is one of those times where you really need to come out and start hot and really probably play hot the entire game. Now, I'm not saying that the Bills offense needs to go out and do what they did like against the Miami Dolphins to necessarily win this game, but you need to come out and really probably go blow for blow with the Bengals early in this game, which figures to be, again, these things tend to never go as expected, but figures to be an up and down type of game as far as both teams kind of moving down the field. Now, look, the Bills offense, like, they've had their struggles, but the Bengals defense has had their fair struggles as far as giving up big plays and allowing a lot of yards this season as well. I mean, their last 2 games, they've given up 384 yards of offense and 460 yards of offense in their last 2 games. So, I mean, you'd like to think that the Bills can get out to a hot start, and we're going to get into some of the advanced statistics here in a bit, but the general theme, I think, for the Bills offense has to be a quick start, and as well as you can't be settling for field goals when you get down in sort of opponent territory and into the red zone.
One re-addition, unless he's inactive today, which I doubt, to the Buffalo Bills offense is Quentin Morris, who was taken off of the injury report or wasn't given a designation at the end of the week. With Quentin Morris returning to the lineup, that gives the Buffalo Bills 2 legitimate, real tight ends in their lineup. Could we see, with guys like Trey Hendrickson on the edge and guys like Sam Hubbard on the edge, who are legitimate threats as pass rushers, could we see, at least in parts, a reintroduction of 12 personnel into the lineup for the Buffalo Bills in order to combat these threats on the edge for the Cincinnati Bengals?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting art tonight because you have Trey Hendrickson, 8 sacks on the season. He's 6th in the NFL there, contributed with a bunch of TFL. The Bengals are 2nd in the NFL in turnover margin at +7. So while their defense does give up yards and points, they are good at taking the ball away. And so when you start thinking about protection and avoiding those types of situations, turning the ball over, potentially giving away sacks and big negative plays, like, maybe the Bills do go back to a little bit of 12 personnel. However, I would say with the personnel they have in Morris and Kincaid, I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. Could it make more sense to bring in an extra lineman like a guy like David Edwards to be that sort of extra protection? the Bengals defensively have not been great as far as defending the tight end. In the passing game, they're 29th in DVOA against the tight ends from a defensive standpoint in the passing game. So this is tough for me. Like, I feel like it makes sense to add a little bit more protection for guys like Spencer Brown on the right side, especially, and maybe using a little more 12 personnel. But I don't know that Kincaid and Morris are the two guys to do that. So if it's me, I'm probably bringing in an extra offensive lineman like David Edwards and kind of still splitting a guy like Kincaid out in the slot or otherwise. And so that would be my plan of attack if you wanted to get that extra protection sort of in. But we'll see. It'll be an interesting chess match for that.
Yeah, Pops Mafia comes in and says no huddle, question mark. The Buffalo Bills obviously utilized a little bit of tempo last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And if it were me, I'm really looking for the Buffalo Bills to take all of these things that they've done well in spurts, and I just want them to put it all together, right? Like, I want them to have defenses guessing. I want them to have defenses on their toes. I want them to be varied. I want them to be multiple. I don't want to have a 11 personnel tempo game followed by a 12 personnel run the ball game followed by a 10 personnel spread them out game. Like, mix and match these things within a football game. Be varied, be multiple. Keep the element of tempo, but also have some drives where you slow it down. Have some 10 personnel packages, have some 11 personnel packages, have some 12 personnel packages. When you're in 10, 11, make sure you're focusing on those quick hitters, because we saw last year in the AFC divisional round game exactly what happens when you try to 5-man protect against Lou Anarumo and the Cincinnati Bengals. Get under center a little bit. Run some play action from under center. Keep utilizing those RPOs. Drop some runs for Josh Allen, right? Have your identity, which probably right now with Dawson Knox out is 11 personnel, but be able to keep the Bengals guessing. Make them have to figure out what personnel that they want on the football field. Make them try to figure out what it is you're doing. Dictate to them dictate to them as opposed to having them dictate to you, which is something I feel like the Buffalo Bills have done in the past. They have been dictated to. Right? Like they have sort of schemed to try to beat the other team other than just doing what they do well and making the other team try to beat them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's part of what will make the job of Anarumo a little bit tougher, right? Is like you need to be a little bit unpredictable if you're the Bills. And I think that at times the Bills offense has been maybe a little bit too predictable. And I think that if the Bills find a matchup that they like, and people going back to the no huddle comment, right? If the Bills find a matchup they like as far as defensive personnel on the field with the Bengals, like that's the time where you go to the up tempo no huddle. Don't let them substitute. It doesn't have to be something you do all game long, because it's not really how it works, right? It's more about like situational and personnel matchups than anything. And so to me, that's where I'm going to be really interested to see if the Bills can find a offensive rhythm early, and they do find some matchups they like with personnel that the Bengals have on the field defensively. I could see that being a situation where then the Bills go to a little bit more up tempo.
Couple of comments here. Pops Mafia says 3rd and short, get under center, please. I can get behind that. Not a big fan of shotgun in short distance situations. RJ Melville comes in and says, I wish Dorsey would scheme guys wide open like both play callers in this Germany game. It's crazy. There's all this motion, play action, super creative plays. Maybe one day. I don't know if I would be that harsh on Ken Dorsey. I think he's a pretty competent offensive play caller. But I will say that personally, I do think that in this day and age, I don't understand why there's not motion on every single play. I don't understand how in the National Football League in the year 2023, when we see what it does when you put defenders in conflict, why you don't have some kind of motion on every single play. Like I'm an Arizona State season ticket holder. Arizona State has one of the most putrid offenses personnel wise in all of college football. And they got their shit kicked by Utah because Utah is like a Big Ten football team playing in the Pac-12, but that's regardless of the point. They played Washington State last week, and there was motion on every single play. And this putrid offense, because of a creative play caller like Kenny Dillingham, instilling motion, getting a little bit of creative, getting guys moving, getting defenders in conflict, they were able to put up 30-plus points and win a football game against a superior opponent because they utilized motion. Now, that's probably a very like baseline, basic example because this is the National Football League. It's a completely different game. But I just think window dressing and moving guys around and putting defenders in conflict, I just think it's such a competitive advantage, and I don't understand why the Buffalo Bills don't do it more.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been a criticism of Ken Dorsey, right? As well,
Mhm.
over the, we've seen at times where that has played well, and we've seen at times where the Bills get creative with motion. And you've seen like situations where they'll rotate a guy in, like the Miami Dolphins have done, where like they'll have a receiver in the backfield and they'll motion him out as they bring a running back into the backfield, things like that. But it's been too far and few in between for, I think, our liking and a lot of the fans' liking. And it certainly adds an element of one more thing that Josh Allen has to worry about post snap. So it's just one of those things that I think, I mean, if Josh Allen has control to potentially do that himself at the line, I don't know. We'll see if that's something that the Bills do more of. But I mean, it would not surprise me if you see the Bengals end up using a lot of motion tonight, and the Bills really need to do the same.
Yeah, looking at the Buffalo Bills offense too, I think another key to this game is going to be to continue to spread the ball around. I mean, I've been saying this every single week on the pregame show. I believe that this offense should funnel through Stephon Diggs, Dalton Kincaid, and James Cook. So any way you can get the ball into Dalton Kincaid's hand, any way you can get the ball into James Cook's hand, I think you got to find a way to do that. But I also think we saw last week the emergence of Gabriel Davis, I shouldn't say the emergence of Gabriel Davis, but the emergence of Gabriel Davis in a variety of ways that we haven't really seen before. And then we saw the emergence of Khalil Shakir because of the introduction of more 11 personnel. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, the more you can get the ball into the hands of Dalton Kincaid, James Cook, Gabriel Davis, and Khalil Shakir, continue to scheme things for them, make them the first read. That takes attention away from Stephon Diggs. Now, could that affect Stephon Diggs' stat lines for a couple of weeks? I certainly think it could. But in the long run, I think that opens up a heck of a lot more for Stephon Diggs and will make him a lot more potent of a threat than he already is as we get down against some of these really, really good teams that we have to face in the upcoming weeks.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, like the Bills offense, I don't think Sean McDermott cares at the end of the day who's the one putting the points on the board. I don't think necessarily Sean McDermott cares who the ball is being distributed to, as long as the offense is putting up points. And let's be real, like if the offense is putting up points and sustaining drives and converting a lot of third downs, like just naturally Stephon Diggs is going to get his fair share. Like there's no equation here where Stephon Diggs is like somehow being less impactful on the game. Right? Like that's not what this is. And in a way, it maybe helps him be more impactful because maybe it takes some of the pressure off of him and takes some of the coverages away from him. Like the Bills do need legitimate threats besides him. And I did like that we did start to see that in that Tampa Bay game where Gabriel Davis obviously had the 12 targets to match Stephon Diggs. So important. Shakir coming up, more importantly in that game, Kincaid coming up. I think it's a good matchup for him as well tonight. So the Bills, and this was part of why I was against trading for a wide receiver at the trade deadline, because I felt like the Bills had what they needed. It was more about utilization than it was anything, and distribution of the football than it was personnel. So yeah, I'm with you. If we can kind of continue to see that trend like we saw against Tampa, and that becomes a little bit more consistent, I think that'll really help things out for this home stretch.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the narrative that some people want to spin around Gabriel Davis is that he's incapable of doing certain things, and that's why the Buffalo Bills don't use him in certain ways. When we saw last week, albeit a small sample size, that maybe he is capable of doing other things. The Buffalo Bills have just never tried to utilize him in those ways. So it'll be interesting to see if the Buffalo Bills want to create a larger sample size of getting Gabriel Davis involved in a more variety of ways as the season progresses. Pops Mafia comes in and says, but where is Sherfield? I think the narrative around Sherfield kind of grew over the course of the offseason. And I think that Sherfield is performing exactly as probably we should have suspected that he was going to perform this season. In all reality, Trent Sherfield is a veteran on a 1-year, very minimal contract, who is a very good special teams player, who is a guy who could step into Gabriel Davis's shoes if Gabriel Davis has an injury, play on the boundary, do his run blocking stuff, etc. But at the end of the day, he's really a Jake Kumerow wide receiver 5 type. Now he's got more speed than Jake Kumerow, certainly. I'm not going to I'm not going to deny that. He's more varied than Jake Kumaro, but that's just sort of like the niche. He's a wide receiver 5 special teamer who can step into the lineup when you need him for a couple of weeks. I think that some of the Josh Allen comments, some of the ways he was catching passes, against air in training camp and in the preseason, like that, some of that kind of stuff, I think created a narrative around Trent Sherfield that he was some kind of X factor offensive weapon, a guy who was going to be a big part of this offense. When I think the reality is he's playing the role that he was exactly meant to play on this football team.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like not get annoyed, but it's like these questions like, where is Sherfield? Where is this guy? Like these guys are like 5th, 6th, 7th on the pecking order.
They're auxiliary players. Yeah.
I mean, like, what do you really expect from them? Like Trent Sherfield's not going to be the guy that goes out and puts up like 8 catches for 90 yards as a complementary weapon. Like
we should be happy that the 5th round pick, the guy with a ceiling with potential, Khalil Shakir, is the one rising above these guys.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And so like, what do you really like? I think it's more about expectations. Like, where do you expect this to come from? Like all of a sudden Sherfield's going to get targets, and like over who though? Like over Kincaid, over Gabe, like it's not going to happen. Right. So yes, there was a point in time where maybe he had the upper hand in training camp over a guy like Khalil Shakir just because of his, his experience and things like that. And, but like at the end of the day, these are again, auxiliary weapons, 5th, 6th, 7th type of guys in the pecking order. And that's, by the way, including like leveraging a guy like James Cook in the passing game as well, who's above them as well. So I don't know. I think it comes down to expectations. Like all these guys can't be catching like 6-7 balls a game.
Yeah, I mean, how many times has Gabriel Davis missed a game due to injury over the past couple of years, and you get a Jake Kumaro game, right? That's Trent Sherfield's role. If Gabriel Davis were to come up injured in any one of these games, I think Trent Sherfield would step up as the boundary guy. Trent Sherfield would see his targets increased, and you would hope as a quality depth player, Trent Sherfield could step in and do an admirable job filling into the shoes of Gabriel Davis. But in terms of, and you said it, like, who's he taking snaps away from? Who's he taking targets away from? Who are you taking off the field? Who are you not throwing the ball to in order to get the ball to Trent Sherfield? It doesn't compute. The Buffalo Bills are feeding the players they need to feed right now. They're feeding their best players. Speaking of that, the biggest advantage for the Buffalo Bills this week, in my opinion, is the fact that the Cincinnati Bengals defense has struggled on early downs, and they've struggled a little bit against the run. I think this is where the Buffalo Bills need to do their damage. They need to do their damage both in the running game, and they need to do their damage on 1st and 2nd down. Try to avoid getting into these 3rd down situations in this football game. What are your thoughts on what I think is the Buffalo Bills' biggest advantage?
I do agree with you that like for as good as the Cincinnati Bengals have been as far as like splashy type plays, they're 5th worst in the league in rushing yards per game allowed. Yeah. So their turnover differential is good, but they're allowing over 20 points per game. They're one of the bottom teams in the league in 3rd down conversion percentage allowed defensively. So the Bills should be able to move the football pretty efficiently against this Bengals team. And like I said, in the past 2 games, they've given up 384 yards and 460 yards. And by the way, in the past 2 games as well, they've given up 24 first downs apiece in each of those games to the opposing offensive. 24 first downs. That's a pretty high number when the NFL average is really around the mid-teens as far as first downs per game, per team are concerned. So that defense, they have good takeaway numbers. They forced at least 2 turnovers in all but 1 game this season. So to me, it's about the Bills playing a clean game and an efficient game and leveraging the strengths which are against this Bengals defense is 3rd downs, converting, not turning the ball over, and ultimately scoring touchdowns when you get into the red zone, which the Bills offensively, statistically, have been one of the best teams, if not the best team in the NFL this year. So to me, avoiding turnovers and avoiding the big negative, like toxic differential type plays on offense, if you're the Bills, like avoiding those big negative plays that would really kind of have, I would say, like lifted up that Bengals defense for the better part of the year. That's what you need to do if you're the Bills. It has to be a clean game tonight.
Speaking of concerns, obviously there's no Dawson Knox. So who helped so much early on in the season when we played edge rushers, like the the Max Crosby game against the Las Vegas Raiders comes to mind, where Dawson Knox stayed in line. Even if he didn't stay in line for the whole play, he was chipping. He was really helping the Buffalo Bills offense function against a premier pass rusher. And the Buffalo Bills are going up against a premier pass rusher this week in Trey Hendrickson, who's an absolute dog. And Sam Hubbard, he's no slouch either on the other end. So how do the Buffalo Bills, without Dawson Knox and that 12 personnel that they had been using, how do we account for Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard? That to me is my biggest concern heading into this football game. What are your thoughts on this matchup and how we handle these two edge rushers?
Well, I think kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. You use the extra offensive linemen, or you really start to leverage the quick passing game, right? The Bengals defense has been not great DVOA wise against wide receiver twos. So Gabe Davis should have a plus matchup in this game. They have not been good against defending the tight end. I think getting Dalton Kincaid, again, out in the sort of intermediate areas where he's kind of played that sort of twitchy route running type of role that we've seen in parts this season, being a security blanket for Josh Allen there in the middle of the field. To me, that's one of the ways to counter against Trey Hendrickson. It's likely one of the things the Bengals are going to do as well against the Bills defensive front. Is this quick passing game for the Bills, I think, has to be ready. And I do think being, under center a bit more, getting the run game going, not necessarily saying you have to get the run game going to use play action from under center, but I do think the run game is kind of sneaky important tonight for the Bills. So it would be nice to see a guy like James Cook start to kind of like impose his will a bit, and for the Bills offensive line to start like moving guys forward, right? Taking where Trey Hendrickson, really lives, and then that's in his pass rushing ability. He's a good run defender too, but like really taking him out of the game as far as like his ability to even get into situations where he can pass rush, like avoid those situations. And I think the Bills will be okay. But personnel wise, I don't know that it's a lot of 12 still in that regard. I still think the quick passing game makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
You got the quick passing game, right? You could maybe see more Latavius Murray than James Cook this evening. Like that could be one of the surprise upsets, just because Latavius Murray as a veteran is probably a more trusted blocker. You have the option to utilize Quentin Morris in 12 personnel packages if you want to, but it's probably a limited number of packages that you have in this game with 12 personnel. I mean, we had, Tom DeLoss on with us last week. He thought we would see maybe some Reggie Gilliam. We didn't see Reggie Gilliam last week. I doubt we maybe see him again, but that's an option. And then you always have something the Buffalo Bills have done in the past where they've utilized wide receivers like Gabriel Davis and Trent Sherfield, who we just had a conversation about, and got even guys like Khalil Shakir. They've lined up closer to the line of scrimmage, and they've, rubbed the edge rushers. They've chipped the edge rushers. They've essentially just like made it a little murkier for those edge rushers to get to the quarterback before they went out to run their routes. So that's another option for the Buffalo Bills to utilize. So have your hot routes available. Josh Allen, throw the ball to your hot routes as available, and the Buffalo Bills should be able to handle the Cincinnati Bengals pass rush. Before we head on to the defense, any final thoughts that you have about the Buffalo Bills offense?
I think to me, this is the game where you really need to start quick, right? I mean, you can't have these lulls in the beginnings of games like they've had. So I'm going to be really looking. And they had a pretty good start in the Tampa game, right? But they didn't finish with a touchdown. So to me, that's a little bit of a good momentum to take into this game. But really, a quick start on offense, I think, is something we've all been waiting for several weeks now. And I think we really need to see it tonight.
All right, let's transition now to the Buffalo Bills defense versus the Cincinnati Bengals offense. The Bengals offense, they have been humming as of late. It also coincides with the healing of Joe Burrow's calf. It's odd. It's almost like sometimes injuries can affect a player negatively when they are trying to gut through an injury. And it's also awfully peculiar that the media loves to point this out for Joe Burrow, but they didn't really have that same empathy and understanding for Josh Allen last year. Just throwing that.
Not a ton. No, not a ton.
But Joe Burrow, I looked at his stats from PFF. I didn't even bother writing them down. I'm just going to simplify here. Joe Burrow versus pressure. He's good. Joe Burrow when blitzed. He's good. All right. So that is why he is nicknamed Joe Cool. Because trust me, it's not because of his wardrobe. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, what do you do to make him uncomfortable now that he's got two legs again?
Yeah, and they're like you said, their offense has been humming. He's been really good. Like in past seasons, one of the things that have been able to slow down the Bengals offense has been their inability to protect Joe Burrow and him taking a lot of sacks, but he's only been sacked 17 times so far this year. And there was a really great piece on sort of how he's been able to get away from pressure as that calf of his gets healthier. I feel like this is one of those situations where the Bills really need to rely on that front four to get home today. And guys like Leonard Floyd, guys like AJ Epinesa, guys like Von Miller now, again, another game sort of in the books for him to get his legs under him. Like, this is the game to me where Von Miller is going to kind of show up and say, hey, I'm here and I'm ready for the second half of this season. And I'm ready to kind of help this team and elevate this defense from a pass rush perspective. This is the game that it would be really timely for the Bills to get out of Von Miller. So to me, it's really critical that the Bills can get at least some kind of pressure on Joe Burrow with just the front four, drop the rest of the guys back into coverage and kind of have that type of game plan that teams like the Bengals have used against like the Chiefs, and teams like the Bills have used against the Chiefs in the past. Like, drop 7, 8 guys in the coverage, 7 guys in the coverage, and really hope that your front four can get home, because this Bengals offense, like you said, has been humming the last 3 weeks.
Before we continue on with this defensive conversation, just a little pause here. The Cincinnati Bengals, or not the Cincinnati Bengals, the Kansas City Chiefs have defeated the Miami Dolphins, so we can clap it up. The Miami Dolphins lose, which is big for the Buffalo Bills in terms of trying to get back into this AFC East race that they always seem to be one game behind. The Jaguars game now stings a little bit more. The Patriots game now really stings a lot more. I'll tell you what,
you can make it all right tonight.
A couple of statistics here. The Miami Dolphins have not beat a team with a winning record since week 3 of last season. It's been over a calendar year since the Miami Dolphins have beaten a team with a winning record. And I'll tell you what, the Kansas City Chiefs offense this year looks hella average. Like, if the Chiefs, who somehow continue to keep winning, because that's what they do, win another Super Bowl this year, it'll be on the back of Steve Spagnuolo, who is just absolutely crushing it with this defense this year in Kansas City. They are carrying the weight right now because that offense is just lacking at the skill position, and they're really not doing much damage on offense.
Yeah, I mean, the Chiefs have kind of, I guess for the first time really in their Mahomes era, have gotten a lot more and probably out of their defense. And guys like Trent McDuffie, it stings us to see him playing well and with the Chiefs. But I mean, we've seen the Chiefs defense in times in the playoffs kind of come up with big when they needed to, but they've been pretty consistent so far this year as well. It was like one of those situations where we thought the Bills potentially would be this year as well. A really good defense to go with that offense. So yeah, we'll see. It looks like the Chiefs once again are in the driver's seat for that number 1 seed. It seems they never have to play on the road in the playoffs. So, long ways to go still, but obviously objective 1 for the Bills is to try to win that division. So Miami losing, I think today, is still for the betterment of the Bills, at least for now.
Fluffy Panda comes into the super chat. He says, just wanted to thank you guys. Love you both. Thank you, Fluffy Panda. We love you and all your comments in the comment section as well. He says, Finns are ranked top 3 in most power rankings. Where would you rank them? They still can't beat winning teams. To me, power rankings, I've never really I used to put a lot of thought and energy into them in my younger years and got ridiculously way too into critiquing power rankings. But as I get older, hopefully I feel like I'm a little wiser and I just don't care about them very much. I would say the Miami Dolphins, with the firepower that they have on offense, with the players that they have on defense, are still a top 10 football team in the National Football League. I think if they had cracks at winning teams every week, they would have gotten one of those wins eventually. They're going to get one of these wins against a winning team eventually. They just happen to be lucky enough to get a pretty easy schedule this year where they're playing losing team after losing team after losing team.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'd probably still put them in maybe the top 5 to 7 range. That may be a little high for some people, but I just think that offense, it does have some pretty significant firepower, and their defense started out a little slow maybe this year, but they have some good players on defense as well. And look, the Chiefs are still, a premier team. So yes, the statistics show Miami really hasn't beaten a great team so far this year. And let's hope, right, at the end of tonight, maybe the Bills are sitting back atop the AFC East if they can pull out the win.
RJ Melville coming in and says, how is it that Spags and Lou Anarumo don't have head coaching jobs? Sick of these awesome DCs sitting in a place for a decade. I don't disagree with you, RJ, but at the other end of the spectrum, as great and as awesome as I think these guys are, you look at the Buffalo Bills, and what is a lot of Buffalo, not ours so much complaints, but what are a lot of Bills fans' complaints when the offense goes stagnant for a couple of weeks? They're like, man, I wish we had a different offensive coordinator. And then you look out at your possible options, and they're limited because most of the good offensive play callers are head coaches. So it's just the way that the league is right now. Those two guys should be head coaches probably in the National Football League, but unfortunately, because of the side of the ball that they coach, they are not currently. But back to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills. What do the Buffalo Bills have to do to slow down Joe Burrow? You obviously just gave your take probably 10 minutes ago after we went on that little bit of a tangent. But to me, I wouldn't bother even trying to blitz this man. I mean, just rush 4, but Sean McDermott, bring back what you had been doing before some of the injuries started to pile up. Disguise who's rushing and do a good job disguising who the 4 people who are going to rush are. Maybe occasionally send an extra guy. I always wince every time I see Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde run up to the line of scrimmage and then try. I'm like, oh shoot, they're gonna throw a fade to a wide receiver, Christian Benford, Dane Jackson. How are you gonna play this ball? Like my anxiety just goes from here to here every time I see Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer run up to the line of scrimmage right before the snap. And then just do a good job. You have to get pressure with 4, so the guys up front got to execute. And then I don't know how possible this is with all the injuries, but just keep doing what you're doing, disguising your coverages. If you can get pressure with 4, if you can disguise your coverages, you can probably force a couple of turnovers, and that'll really turn the tide of this game. I don't think you can stop the Cincinnati Bengals offense, but you can certainly force field goals, and you can certainly force turnovers, and that will help your offense out as you attempt to win this football game. The question to me, though, is can we do it with these injuries? I know we might have some reinforcements coming.
Yeah, and that's where you, like I said in the beginning, you'd love to have a guy like Rasul Douglas kind of ready to go for tonight. And again, I mean, maybe the odds are that he is active, and you'd like to think that's the case, but how many plays can he play? He's certainly a guy that in this type of matchup would be a huge welcome addition, right? His off-ball skills, his ability to play the football, his length, he would be a guy that you'd love to match up with a guy like T. Higgins, right? Because T. Higgins has that size in that zone. T. Higgins has that length, and that's a matchup that right now, as it stands, I think is a pretty big advantage for the Bengals. And while T. Higgins hasn't necessarily broken out yet this year, he's starting to look like that could come at any time. Made some key catches last week against the Niners. Jamar Chase is still doing his, and Christian Benford obviously is going to have his hands full. And the Bills probably going to rely on Micah Hyde a lot to kind of make sure that a guy like Jamar Chase doesn't take the top off of that defense and shade Micah Hyde to that side of the field. But yeah, Rasul Douglas to me would be such a nice player to have tonight for coming in and playing against a guy like T. Higgins. So yeah, we'll see. You're not gonna be able to slow him down, like I said. And early in that Monday night game last year, before obviously the stuff happened with DeMar, Tyler Boyd was a guy also who can do some damage to you. So Taron Johnson's got to be on his game as well tonight. Big task for the secondary tonight.
A lot of people coming in the comments section. I like Hyde, Poyer, and Rapp all on the field at the same time. Brendan P coming in saying we need some Rapp sightings tonight. Limit those big plays. And Roy Collins coming in. I like this comment. He says, let's not rely on the defense to win the game. Let's get that effing offense going. I can get behind that statement right there. Before we head on to some other things like superlatives, Jamar Chase, I think we need to have a conversation about one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. We had a conversation, I think, week 2 when we played the Las Vegas Raiders. We're like, yeah, Devontae Adams can get his and the Buffalo Bills can still win the football game. Not so much the case with Jamar Chase, especially with the other weapons that the Cincinnati Bengals offense has. Last week, he went 10 catches on 12 targets for 100 yards and a touchdown against a very good San Francisco defense. A couple of weeks ago, he went 15 catches on 19 targets for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns versus the Arizona Cardinals. So he is getting hot right now as we approach the middle of this National Football League season. If it were me, I would bracket the shit out of him. And I would live with whatever. And even though they're very good players, I would just live with whatever T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd do to you. But what are your and that's what makes it very difficult, because those are two very good players. But what are your thoughts on how the Buffalo Bills should approach Jamar Chase?
I mean, that's got to be the plan, right? He's had over 30 catches combined in his last 3 games. He's got almost 400 yards combined in his last 3 games, 4 touchdowns. His catch percentage in 2 of those games, one of those games was right under 80%. Last week was over 80%. So he's getting efficient use of his targets as well. The Bills, like, they basically kind of need to do sort of what the Seattle Seahawks did to him 2 weeks ago, where they limited him to 6 catches for 80 yards, had an impact on the game, but not the breakaway or the game-changing impact necessarily that you've come to expect from a guy like Jamar Chase when he gets going. So look, at the end of the day, the Bills end up getting beat by the likes of Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, like, I think that we're just going to have to live with it, given that, again, T. Higgins has only 19 catches on the season. Tyler Boyd's second leading receiver on this team with 33 catches behind Jamar Chase's 60. So, like, basically you have to try to funnel things away from Jamar Chase as much as you can and hope that guys like Dane Jackson and maybe Rasul Douglas, right, if he plays some snaps tonight, and guys like Taron Johnson can hold up against those guys. Obviously, they'll have some help from Jordan Poyer as well in that. But to me, Micah Hyde plays a really critical role in the game tonight, from taking away the big downfield plays to Jamar Chase. You're not going to stop him completely, like we said with Adams. But if you can make, I always call it, like, make his impact a little bit more hollow. Like, he may get statistics, but you want him to be like hollow statistics where they're not like game-changing type plays. So, yeah.
Mark C comes in and says, plain and simple, can we stop the run? Who comes in and says, yeah, I feel like stopping the run is important here. We let Mixon open this up last year, and that really helped them in the passing game. What are your thoughts? I think Linval Joseph plays in this football game. I think Poona Ford has been a disappointment thus far, at least in the eyes of the Buffalo Bills coaching staff. So we sort of talked at the top of the show. I know we got a lot more people in the watching right now that this morning football game in Germany is over. So smash that like button, help us out. At the top of the show, we discussed maybe Poona Ford sits down for Linval Joseph, or maybe we carry 5 DTs and Kingsley Jonathan takes a seat this game. But what do you think the Buffalo Bills do to try to slow down Joe Mixon?
Yeah, I think Linval Joseph should play in this game, even if it's 20, 25 snaps. Like, you need to put the Bengals in some third and long situations. I know even the Bills haven't necessarily been great at third and long defense, but they're still one of the best defensive teams on third down statistically. So for all the frustration we tend to have around the Bills and giving up third down conversions, we're still one of the best defensive teams on third down. So force the Bengals into third downs, force third and longs. Ultimately, if they come out and they change up their game plan and they start throwing the rock all around on early downs, and they maybe don't necessarily lean on the running game as much, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the Bills, right? Because I do think Joe Mixon does present a pretty good matchup for the Bengals against the Bills. And I think, having a guy like Linval Joseph in there would be, obviously would be nice to have tonight. The Bengals, the Bengals are one of the worst rushing teams in the league so far this year, but it's like, it's a lot to do with the slow start. And really, Joe Mixon has just kind of more recently been getting it going. But if you actually take a look at the Bengals in their last, several games running the ball, like last week against the Niners, rushing offense for the Bengals was their best game of the season with 134. They hadn't rushed the ball for over 100 yards in a game before last week. So I think that's something that we should really make sure, keep them in third and longs, do your best you can on early downs, and Linval Joseph should be in on that, I hope.
Any final thoughts on what the Buffalo Bills should be doing defensively to match up with these Cincinnati Bengals before we move on to our pregame superlatives.
I mean, I think it's the same game plan where you take on teams with great offenses. Like, you need to limit the big plays, right? And the Bills did pretty good job of doing that against the likes of the Dolphins. Obviously a big play team, and they've taken other big play threats out of games as well this year and limited the damage. So again, make the Bengals drive down 12-15 plays if you can.
You mentioned toxic differential at the top of the show, and I think that is probably like one of the main statistics to keep your eye on over the course of this football game, because whoever wins the toxic differential is probably going to win this football game. One last thing before we get to our pregame superlatives: Tyler Bass versus Evan McPherson. It's a fun matchup between two of the better young kickers in the National Football League. Hopefully Tyler Bass, he's not kicking too many field goals because we're scoring touchdowns, but hopefully when he does have to kick a field goal, he gets himself back and he gets himself a little course corrected. He's had a few issues the last couple of weeks, but he is a good young kicker, and let's hope it stays that way. Before we get to pregame superlatives, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like us, you can even get it mailed to your home. And I can tell you from experience, it is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, let's get into it. Our pregame superlatives. As always, in the comment section, hit us up with your award winners for these pregame superlatives that we run through, and we'll read some of your guys' comments over the course of our discussion here. But Dave, we'll start with you. Your take me higher player of the game for the Buffalo Bills today. Who is the star player that needs to step up in order for the Buffalo Bills to secure that W?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is the game for Dalton Kincaid to continue his breakout, right? On a big stage. I think that the momentum is building for him. Obviously, these last 2 games, he's had really solid games. Dawson Knox being on the IR has obviously helped that a bit, but he needs to be the guy that becomes part of this quick passing game where I think the Bills can have success in taking guys like Trey Hendrickson sort of out of the game. A week ago against the 49ers, George Kittle, 9 catches for 149 yards against the Bengals. The Bengals DVOA 29th against the tight end this year, having their struggles in defending the tight end this season. And you don't have to even look back as far as just a week ago to see what George Kittle did to this Bengals defense. So to me, Dalton Kincaid, this could, he had his kind of coming out moment and getting his first touchdown last week, but this to me could be an opportunity for him to even build upon that, right? From a volume impact standpoint, I see Dalton Kincaid as being a take me higher.
That's a good one. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here. My take me higher player of the game is not a player. I'm going with Sean McDermott. I think that we talked at the top of the show how, statistically speaking, the winner of this football game has a very, very good chance of making the playoffs. The loser, their chances of making the playoffs plummets a little bit. And this might be one of the bigger regular season games of Sean McDermott's career. This is, I think, a game that could really put us in a direction, if we win it, to have a really good back half of the season against some really good football teams and position us to be successful come the postseason. This is a game where if we lose it, it could do some damage, right? And there could be a hangover going into games against teams like the Denver Broncos on Monday Night Football, et cetera. So I think the Buffalo Bills, you want to come out with juice, and Sean McDermott is a big part of that, motivating this football team, having them ready to go out there and execute. And I think you're going to need a master class from Sean McDermott. The Buffalo Bills don't have an offensive-minded head coach. Our advantage should be that we have a defensive-minded head coach. So when we play some of these big offenses in the National Football League, you would expect your defensive mastermind head coach, especially one who's calling the plays, to be able to shut down or at least limit a very, very good offense like they have in Cincinnati. So if you're Sean McDermott, disguise who's rushing, get pressure with 4, disguise your coverages, try to force turnovers, try to force field goals. You're obviously not going to shut down the Bengals offense no matter how good of a defensive coordinator you are. But you want to slow them down. You want to limit their opportunities. And we have seen Sean McDermott do this before. He did it against the Miami Dolphins. So I'm going to say we need him to do it again. Sean McDermott is my take me higher coach of the game for the Buffalo Bills. All right, now on to our wild card player of the game. This is a surprise player that steps up and comes up big for the Buffalo Bills and helps them secure a W today. Pops Mafia already come in saying Dane Jackson and all the DBs need to step up. So if Rasul Douglas doesn't enter the lineup this week and Dane Jackson is out there, it's probably going to be his responsibility to go mano-a-mano with a guy like T. Higgins. And that's very, very important for the Buffalo Bills. So I really like that one from Pops Mafia. And I guess Spin 0481 comes in and says Rasul Douglas gets pick. So that would be a wild card play of the game from a guy that maybe we don't expect to start this evening for the Buffalo Bills. Dave, who's your wild card player of the game?
Yeah, this is a tough one, right? Because there's not a ton of guys right now that are like in a position where in this matchup, I feel like are set up to be like a true wild card. So maybe I'll say Deontay Hardy in this game, in the return game. I think Khalil Shakir getting more reps on offense is really kind of like cemented Deontay Hardy as being kind of the guy that can focus a little bit right now more on the return game, and not to say that he shouldn't be involved in the offense, because I think he should. But toxic differential we talked about, can Deontay Hardy flip the field potentially on one of these punts or something like that? If the Bills can force the Cincinnati punt, any punt forced by the defense in this game is going to be a win. So then to kind of expound on that and then take advantage through a big punt return, and ideally one with no penalties, obviously, because it seems like every punt return Deontay Hardy has gets called with a penalty. He can flip the field, right? And he showed even last game against Tampa on a couple of those where he did get a couple of those called back. The ones he didn't, he flipped the field, right? Like he on that punt against Tampa, where the Tampa was punting from deep in their own end zone, the Bills ended up getting the ball back on like Tampa Bay's like 25-yard line. So those type of plays could be big in this game as far as differentiating and in that toxic differential. So give me Deontay Hardy as a wild card.
Pops Mafia comes in, says Sherfield gets a touchdown. Roy Collins is with you, but he says Deontay Hardy on offense. He catches a deep one today. Brendan P says Hyde and Poyer. I think I would probably put that more with the take me higher. Ranting Lee comes in, says Von Miller. Be a great day for him to come back to form. So maybe that is wild card because we haven't seen vintage Von Miller yet. But
maybe
to me, that would probably also be more take me higher. But I'm going to throw those in there right now. My wild card, I'm going to go with Latavius Murray. I think there might be some points in today's game where the Buffalo Bills try to balance things out and they try to have and sustain some longer drives. And I think Latavius Murray could be a part of that. We've seen him reel off some really consistent big runs between the tackles for us this year. I think he could be key there. You look in the red zone, right? We have seen him, despite his lack of recent success, we have seen us give us some juice, specifically at the goal line. So punching it in from the 1-2 yard line, maybe Latavius Murray can help us out in this game. And I just think he'll be on the field more, just strictly for pass protection reasons. The Buffalo Bills could be running more 11 and 10 personnel without Dawson Knox in the lineup. And obviously James Cook has been noted for his struggles in pass protection in the past. Bills coaching staff definitely do not trust him as much as they trust a guy like Latavius Murray. Latavius Murray maybe feeling the heat from Leonard Fournette, who felt the cold this week in Buffalo. And Latavius Murray has a big wild card game for the Buffalo Bills. All right. Now on to our Respect You player of the game. This is a player on the Cincinnati Bengals team that you have to respect in order to win this football game. Dave, we'll start with you. Then I'll go, and then we have the super chat here we got to get to.
Yeah, I think Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are like, you don't even need to mention them, right? Like those guys are automatic Respect You players of the game. But I'll come back to a guy who I've kind of touched on a few times during the course of this show, and that's T. Higgins. Got it going a little bit last week against the Niners. He's had some nagging injuries this year, and he hasn't necessarily lived up to a lot of expectation that was put on his shoulders this year yet. But it's a good matchup for the Bengals, I think. And depending on how the Bills want to cover a guy like Jamar Chase with extra people and bracketing him with Micah Hyde, a guy like T. Higgins is going to be a problem, or could be a problem for the Bills with his size. So to me, T. Higgins is a guy you got to respect. This is a situation where if Rasul Douglas was going to come in and play maybe some limited snaps, you'd like to bring him in on maybe some key third downs against a guy like Higgins if he's lining up on that side of the field. So to me, I think even though he hasn't had the best start to this year, you've got to respect T. Higgins.
Yeah. Josh Clarkson with I think is a good one. He says DJ Reader. I mean, we saw Christian Barmore giving guys like Osiris Torrance, Mitch Morris, and Connor McGovern issues when we played the Patriots. So we didn't have to face Vita Vea last week, thank goodness. So a guy like DJ Reader could be big, and it'll be really interesting to see how the interior offensive line holds up against a player the caliber of DJ Reader, and then Trey Hendrickson as well. I mean, this is my respect you player of the game. 8 sacks on the season. Big time player who makes big time plays in big time games. He is the heart and soul of that defense for them. So I am going to go with Trent Hendrickson as my respect you player of the game as well. Joshua Richardson coming to the super chat. Always appreciate you, Josh. He says, "What's up, fellas? Great show as always. I think we win the game 31-20. Josh Allen will have a big game, and Dalton Kincaid has 2 touchdowns. Douglas will also ball out too." So maybe that's a little segue into our wild card player of the game. Joshua says, Rasul Douglas acquired this week, balls out, and Dalton Kincaid scores 2 touchdowns. Dave, who's your wild card player of the game? A guy who's not wild card player of the game, your hot take of the game, excuse me. What is your hottest take heading into this football game?
My hot take for this game is that neither team forces a turnover. I think there are no turnovers in this game. I think both teams
that is spicy.
Yeah, I think both teams play a really clean game. I think that this is going to come down to execution, game planning, coaching decisions, things like that. I don't see either team either offense, I would say, giving the defense a chance to give a short field or a cheap takeaway. I'll say my hot take for today is no turnovers from either team.
That is a spicy take. Pops Mafia comes in and says Kincaid over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns today. I'm going to go, it's this big game Gabriel Davis, 6+ catches, 100+ yards, 2 touchdowns for Gabriel Davis on the day. I think he takes some of the pressure off of Stephon Diggs, and he helps the Buffalo Bills get the points that they need in order to win this football game today. Brendan P comes in and says 2 forced fumbles for the defense and a pick. So 3 turnovers. He's going the opposite of tilt here. So got a little bit of Mexican standoff with Brendan P and Dave Tilton. So, all right, let's get now to our Back to the Future game predictions. Dave, paint a picture for us. How do you envision this game playing out, and what do you think the final score will be?
I do think it'll be a clean game, like I said, although I do think that I regrettably say that the Bills maybe still struggle a bit early in the game offensively in getting touchdowns or scoring early. So I do think the Bills are going to be playing a bit of catch up in this game. I could see them going down by a score early on, ultimately trying to catch up. Maybe the defense makes a big stand late, but I do think this game is going to be super tight throughout. I also think it's key, whoever wins the toss. I wouldn't be opposed to, if the Bills win the toss, taking the football and trying to go down and score first. 100%. I think that was a big criticism of the decision last year. Look, I love the double dip as much as anybody, but if you can get out to a lead in this game, that to me is really important. But I do think the Bills are playing from behind a bit in this game. Ultimately, they will get it done in the end and pull out a close win into the third and late stages of the fourth quarter. A lot of points scored in this game. Bills 31, Bengals 28.
Yeah, Zach of all trades coming in saying Bills 30, Bengals 26. I am going to go with Bills 38, Bengals 31. I think the Buffalo Bills are going to win this game. They're going to win this game in a shootout. They need the offense of old to make a comeback in order to win this football game. I think that they are capable of doing that. And they need this defense to get a timely stop. I think the Bengals will get the ball back. They'll have a chance to tie or win this football game if they make the decision to go for 2. And I think the Buffalo Bills defense will come up big, and they will get a stop as the Bengals are trying to march down the field and score a touchdown to send the game to overtime. Bills 38, Bengals 31. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You can catch us Monday at 9 p.m. right here for our Bills-Bengals reaction. Hopefully it's not our 4th therapy session of the season. And don't forget that the Cover One post game is live tonight following the game. You can join Greg, you can join Aaron, and David Fox will have his post game report on cover1.football immediately following the game as well. All right, Bills Mafia, get your beverages, your pizza, and your wings ready to go, and try your best. Despite all of the anxieties of having to wait until 8:20 to see the Buffalo Bills, try your best to enjoy the next 7 hours of commercial-free football. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!